As many times as we've done this, I'm still like, unmute, unmute.
Okay, Wendy, if you want to go ahead and start, we can.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Wendy Kalergis, and I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Miami and the Beaches Hotel Association. And we're super excited to begin our series of 5 different webinars in technology in partnership with FIU Chaplin School of Hospitality Management. I'm also a proud member of the Dean's Advisory Council. I'd like to thank very much the support of Dean Michael Chang of the FIU Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism, and also very, very grateful to a very long friendship with Mike Hampton, professor of FIU Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism, who has been such a wonderful motivator and collaborator together with us on all these wonderful webinars that we've been doing. So we're really excited about this new partnership and in robotics and automation in the hospitality industry. So before I get started, I want to tell you, I shared with the panel that I want a robot that can clean my house. So they're going to work on that for me. We do have that. We have the what is it? The Roomba, the little vacuum. It's so fun. So it gives me, I'd like to also thank Yvonne Ye Amor Senior, account manager for PR and marketing for FIU, and also Olivia Katasas, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, a marketing intern who we just met, development of FIU. Really looking forward to working with you. And as you know, the audience comprises of students as well. So I want to welcome the students. I want to also give them support and encouragement that our industry is doing really well and things are coming back, everything's opening up. So we're going to have a really great upcoming year. So it now gives me pleasure to introduce Lisa Kane, PhD, Assistant Professor of FIU Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism. And I'd like to just give you a little bit of background about Dr. Lisa Kane. She's an assistant professor in the Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism Management at FIU, where she teaches marketing management and globalization and competitive methods in the hospitality industry at the graduate level. Her research interests fall within the broad topics of organizational behavior and marketing, with an emphasis on understanding internal and external customer experiences. Specifically, she's published in the areas of work-life balance, that sounds great, so substance abuse among hospitality workers, gender issues, technology, and loyalty in the hospitality industry. She continues to develop research in all of these topics. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kane. Thank you so much for moderating this panel and collaborating with us.
Wendy, thank you so much for having me and the rest of the panel. And once again, welcome to everyone. It is an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to have 3 of the world's foremost scholars in robotics and automation in the hospitality industry joining us today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the Greater Miami and the Beaches Hotel Association, and of course the Chaplin School of Hospitality and Tourism Management for hosting this Tech Talk series. And I would like to start by introducing this esteemed panel, and I'm going to do so in alphabetical order. So I will start with Dr. Katerina Berezina. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Nutrition and Hospitality Management at the University of Mississippi. Her research interests are in the areas of information technology in hospitality and tourism, electronic distribution, and revenue management. Dr. Berezina also serves as the managing editor of the Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Technology. Next, we have Dr. Stanislav Ivanov, who is currently professor and vice rector at Varna University of Management in Bulgaria, and he is also the CEO of the consulting company Zangador Limited. Professor Ivanov is the founder and editor-in-chief of 2 academic journals, European Journal of Tourism Research and the newly founded Robonomics, the Journal of the Automated Economy. His research interests include robonomics, robots in hospitality and tourism, the economics of technology, revenue management, destination marketing, tourism, and economic growth and political issues in tourism. And finally, we have Dr. Craig Webster, who is an associate professor in the Department of Applied Business Studies at Ball State University in the United States. He received a PhD in political science from Binghamton University and an MBA from Intercollege in Cyprus. His research interests include the political economy of tourism, the management of events, and automation in the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry. Thank you all once again for participating in this discussion. And of course, we're going to start with, why we're looking at AI and robotics. And it's partly because they're a powerful combination for automating tasks, including inside and outside of the work setting. And in recent years, it's become increasingly common to have AI and robots and robotic solutions to introduce flexibility into the workplace. They also have learning capabilities, and they can sort of accommodate these previously rigid or mundane tasks that we previously needed people for. And especially with COVID-19, I think we're seeing sort of a spawning or a stimulus to promote further and more quickly adopt robots and technology. So I'm going to start by asking Katerina the first question. I would love for us to discuss the customer experience and the future of the hospitality industry. So how do we stay hospitable and caring when machines are serving people?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Lisa and Wendy, for hosting this event and for introducing us. It's a great pleasure to be here with everyone today. So it's a great question and a very interesting question about the experiences of our customers. So I think that we need to look at the overall experience of guests from 2 different perspectives. So if we consider the way how robots and automation are introduced right now in the hospitality industry, then on a large scale, we can see that robots and automation as well can be either used to support those tasks that are performed by humans, or in a way we can say that they may enhance performance of human employees for all those reasons that you just mentioned. They don't get tired, they have the intelligence, they can know much more information that humans can, and so on. So on the other hand, we also need to think about those situations when we use robots and automation to substitute or replace human employees, right? And the last scenario may be somewhat scary to some people at this point, but at the same time, let's think through what is going to happen at that time and how the experience may change due to that. So basically, if we talk about enhancing or supporting human employees, we have seen already a variety of different examples used in the hospitality industry. For example, Bear Robotics created Penny, who is an assistant to wait employees in restaurants, and Penny helps that wait staff to bring heavy trays with food and deliver them to the tables, right? We may also talk about the Saviok robot, for example, butler, that runs deliveries in hotels. So Penny may be working right next to a human employee, and the butler, for example, can go and do the delivery by themselves. But what happens with the guest experience in those cases? So we overall see that right now robots may serve as a novelty. It's something new and different, and we often see that customers will enjoy that. If the robot is cute, if the robot is helpful, the robot helps to get the delivery in the room faster, or the robot assists an employee to bring that food for the entire table at the same time. So they see that as a positive thing. So we may also think about kids who fall in love with butler and can chase the robot around the hotel. So I think that there are a lot of positives, but we also need to think about probably the other side of the coin. And if we think of a hotel henna, which we can say probably got so much attention just because they introduced robots, right? So it was a very unique, again, novel experience, and I think that attracted a lot of customers to them. But not all of those experiences were exactly positive. So I think that when we are trying to introduce the robot for a supporting role, it's very important to think through the task that they are going to perform, look at the functionality, if robots can really interact in different languages with clients, if they can deliver that task that they were intended to do. So, and then on the other hand, we also may think about a scenario when we fully substitute a human and we replace that human employee with a robotic employee of any sort. And again, we have seen that in different capacities, such as we have robotic bartenders these days. So again, the example of the Henna Hotel, they implemented robots in a variety of the positions across the property, including the front desk agents, bellman, you know, and in-room assistant. So, but in that case, we also need to think of how the innovation is happening and what these robots bring to the guest experience, right? So if we extend this to a larger scale, and if we think about a situation when many hotels may be run that way, right? So that part may become a normal experience for all guests, right? Then we will need to consider different ways how properties may innovate in that space and how they may use robots to enhance the guest experience, right? So we may look at innovation again from different perspectives, such as changing the process, how our planning of the experience works. And even these days, we already have virtual assistants. So if you take this technology and sort of put it on steroids and think that they will be more powerful and they will be more aware of what we do, what we like, what we don't like, then that particular technology may be very helpful in planning the overall guest experience. So at the same time, we may also think about self-driving vehicles. So if we take that robot, then it will probably even be blurring the lines between transportation and accommodation, right? Because if you think of modern day RVs where you have to drive, but you also have the hotel room behind you. So in the case of a self-driving car, you don't have to drive anymore. So from that perspective, the experience will be changing greatly because you can be enjoying the road, you can be enjoying the sightseeing, and at the same time, you can be spending time with your family or friends. So, and then overall, that may also bring different innovations from the perspective of output or what the customer and the company in the hospitality industry will receive. So, and those may be the cost reductions, for example, the travel may become more efficient. If we put those self-driving vehicles on the road, there is a chance that it will make travel faster and better optimized, right? So we may think about time saving, we may think about a high utility of time if guests have a better quality of time altogether on the road. So at the same time, we may even say that travel may become more accessible to different people. So right now, when we think about traveling, for example, by car, then you have to be able to drive, right? You have to have good vision, you should not be fatigued. So think about all these different scenarios, international flights, red-eye flights. So that poses different restrictions. When I come to a different country, I may not be able to read the signs on the road because I don't know the language. It makes it difficult. So if we bring automation, that may provide, different avenues for us to improve the travel experience overall by using all of these technologies that we even have in place today, but as they keep developing, they may basically revolutionize the travel experience, I think.
Those are fantastic points. And from what I heard from what you were saying, we have currently two options in terms of robots and AI facilitating the consumer experience, both in travel and then also in hospitality. And that is as a complement to the service experience, and then also as a supplement for the human person providing the actual experience. And I think that sort of leads nicely into a discussion on the economics of service robots in tourism and how hospitality facilities will change, how they can prepare for robots. maybe we can discuss when we should be supplementing and complementing versus replacing entirely, and then what that service scape looks like thereafter. Stan, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you so much for hosting this event. Dr. Berezina mentioned about the Henna Hotel, which is a wonderful example. It is the first Robotel in the world, opened in, if I remember well, March 2015. I would like, however, to remind that in January 2019, Henna Hotel entered the news again by turning off half of their robots. They said that practically the robots they had created more work for the employees rather than replacing the employees. So when we talk about the use of robots in hospitality, and when robots, when the adoption, the implementation of robots in the tourism hospitality context is successful or it's a failure, we need to consider the economic aspects of robotic technologies. We need to, before a company implements service robots, it needs to make a very detailed cost-benefit analysis and to consider the financial and the non-financial benefits, the financial and the non-financial costs related to the use of robots. One of the dimensions will be the experience, whether service robots will improve the experience or they will deteriorate the experience of customers. But also what happens with the experience of the hospitality employees. Because we often talk about the experience of the customers, but we need to consider that the robots will be co-workers of the hospitality employees. And we need to consider their working experience as well. At the end of the day, service robots are technology; they are assets, and as such, we need to make very proper financial calculations whether it is worth the investment in this technology or not. Whether it will be possible for the company to recover the investment that it made in robotic technologies. This is often not so easy because it's very easy to calculate the costs, the financial costs that are related to investment in service robots, but what happens with the revenues? For example, if we go to a hotel and order room service, probably the meal will be prepared by a human employee, but it will be delivered to the room by a robot. It is easy to account for the labor costs and for the technology-related costs. But what happened with the labor-related revenues and technology-related revenues in this case? How will they be split in order to be sure that we can make proper calculations? But also, one of the issues that hinders the adoption of service robots is the sunk costs and also the vendor walk-in effect. Sunk costs. This means that that many companies, they already made significant investments in their facilities, in other technologies that they are currently using, and adding robots to this or replacing technology with robotic technologies or artificial intelligence and others before they have recovered their investments in their previous investments is not worth. So this may be pushing the implementation of service robots to a future date. But also the vendor walk-in effect. When we sign a contract with one robotic manufacturer to use their robots, we are practically like married to this manufacturer, because often the parts are not compatible. You cannot use the parts produced by one manufacturer on another robot. So it will be long-term usage of the robot from that company. Of course, we need to consider renting, like technology as a service. In our case, it will be robot as a service, because this will decrease our dependence, and it will decrease also the cash outflow from the company. But also from a financial point of view, it will transform the payments, the costs for the robots to monthly payments. So they will be directly comparable to the salaries of human employees. So in that case, whether it is financial wise to invest in robots will be easier to calculate. Of course, we need to consider the relative productivity of robots and human employees. For example, how many customers, how many room service deliveries can one robot perform in a day, and how many can a human employee do? And of course, we need to consider the robot friendliness of the facilities. This is important because if we have a robot at the reception that is stationary, there is little use of it. A self-service kiosk can deliver the same service at a much lower price than a service robot. A service robot in a hotel makes sense if it is mobile. So, but in order to move around, companies will need to invest in the robot friendliness of the facilities. In human language, this means that the facilities of the company, of the hotel, they help the robot perform its tasks. So it helps the robot to orientate, to move around, to locate its exact position. For example, the hotel will probably need to invest in different sensors on the walls, digital map of the facility. But so these are these issues that that need to be considered. This is important because there's always a trade-off between the intelligence of the building and the intelligence of the robot. So if we invest in the building, then we can use a cheaper robot. But if because a simple robot will be able to orientate there, and practically the sensors in the building will guide it. But in another case, if the building is not robot friendly, then we'll need a more complicated robot, which means higher costs. So many robotic projects may fail because of simple economics.
I have a follow-up question to that, actually, because I heard you talk about infrastructure, which is incredibly important. And we actually had a panelist ask if we're familiar with software robots and robotic process automation, which can help with the tasks as well as the computers as well. But in addition to the infrastructure and the costs of, labor time save and the guest experience as well as the employee experience, one thing I didn't hear you mention was about planned obsolescence in technology and how that also impacts the overall pricing strategy and whether or not to buy into the robots. And I'm not sure how you would plan on considering that as well.
Yeah. Planned obsolescence is really important because it limits the economic life of the robots. If considering the speed of development of technology, probably it will be best if the company is renting robots rather than buying robots. And this is, by the way, what I see with SoftBank Robotics or other companies. I think Promobot also have a similar strategy where you rent the robot, because this decreases the financial dependence of the company, of the buyer on the supply of the robot. So practically, even you can sign a contract, let's say for 1 year, then you can renew it, or you can terminate it and you rent another robot. So practically, you will not experience the negative effects of planned obsolescence in that case.
That's fantastic. And we have a participant, Sergio Alvarez, who says that leasing automation technology is very helpful and a good idea. So thank you for sharing all of these points. Craig, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think Stanislav hasn't said explicitly, but I think it's very suggestive of his discussion, is that companies shouldn't just jump into robotics without thinking about the costs and benefits of it. Just because it's trendy doesn't mean it's a good idea. And there are true costs involved in adopting robots, and there are benefits. And when you just buy the benefits and forget about those costs, including the dependency upon a particular vendor, it might not be worth it. And it's also, I mean, another thing Stanislav, I think we'll be talking about a little bit is demography and labor costs. And there are reasons to be concerned about demographic change and the costs of labor versus the cost and benefits of robots.
Stan, would you like to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, what I can say is that first, tourism managers, they should go away from the hype about the technology. The fact that something is trendy, as Craig said, does not mean that someone needs to adopt it. For some hotels, robots are fantastic. They can be they can be adopted. I can easily imagine hotels in Las Vegas which have several thousand rooms with one hotel with 5,000 rooms there can easily have more than 100 robots for information provision, for room service delivery, for entertaining guests as hosted in restaurants, as waiters, etc. That's easy because this is the positioning of the company. However, if you have a small hotel with several tens of rooms, or if you have a guest house, practically your positioning is completely different. Your unique selling proposition is different. And to use robotic technologies probably is not a good idea. That's why companies need to implement a detailed cost-benefit analysis before jumping into this. And about the demography that Craig mentioned, this is a huge tsunami that is coming to developed economies. Something that people now rarely talk about, but we need to consider this. Birth rates are plummeting in developing economies. In the US, it's I think something like 1.7 kids per woman. We need something like slightly more than 2 kids per woman in order to keep the population stable. But in the US, Europe, Russia, in China, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, birth rates are much lower. In Bulgaria, for example, it is slightly above 1.5 kids per woman. This means that practically now the number of children that are born is something like 25–30% less than necessary to keeping the population stable, considering the same mortality rate. This means that probably in less than 10 years, companies from all sectors in the economy will be forced to automate, regardless whether they want it or not because of other reasons, but just because there will be not sufficient potential employees. This happened even in Bulgaria during the last years. Previously, we had a very high unemployment rate, and it was difficult to find jobs. But in the last 5 years, companies they find it difficult to find employees, and so many of them started to automate processes through chatbots or to use other types of software, and even physical robots. So this is something big that is going to that is already coming, and in countries like, for example, South Korea, the latest data that we have from 2018 is that is less than 1 child per woman. This means that practically the number of children there that are being born is only half of the necessary. So we can expect huge demographic problems there and huge demand for automation technologies.
South Korea is an especially bad situation. I mean, the government there estimates that they'll be extinct in 700 years. So reproduction of humans is an issue here, a major, and this is something that is predictable, foreseeable, and we can plan for.
So I'm going to pull in one of our attendees' questions because I think it fits really nicely with what you're both talking about. John Thomas asked if new buildings of hotel properties should be designed for robotic operations. And I think I know the answer to that based on the size of them, but I'd love to hear you elaborate a little bit more on that.
So whether it will depend on the size. Should new buildings of hotel properties be designed for robotic operations? Yes, it depends on, again, planning whether to use robots needs to take place before the hotel starts to operate. Of course, if we have a small property with 20 rooms, it's useless. But if we plan to have a hotel with several hundred rooms, definitely you need to plan this in advance. By the way, all these requirements for accessibility of hotels, restaurants, they practically make the buildings robot friendly in terms of mobility. The only thing that is probably necessary is to put some sensors to make the building a little bit smarter to help the robots communicate with the lifts and navigate around easier. So in short, yes, but not always. Depends on the positioning of the property.
May I add something here, Lisa? I just wanted to build on everything that Stan said, and I think that the decision about designing the property should take into account everything that Stan was talking about, whether it's logical, whether or not it makes sense to employ robots. And then, yes, if you make this decision, you should design the property for robots, I think, because, for example, those ADA compliance recommendations, they will be there anyway if you want to make your property ADA compliant. But at the same time, the design may show itself in a variety of different ways, such as, for example, when a robot is navigating a hallway, if it's a robot that runs deliveries, right? So sensors may help, or even the color contrast may help. So as of right now, robots don't do very well with, for example, if you have a beige carpet on the floor and beige walls, if you have a lot of mirrors around. So all of that will also result in the way how you plan even your interior design, not even only the layout of the property, but even some of the elements of the visual appeal and the atmosphere that you want to create inside of your hotel. So then, depending also on the type of the robot that you would like to use, for example, if you would like to use robots for housekeeping, okay, that's your decision. Operationally, this is how you would like to do it. Then think about such questions as of right now, how is this robot going to get into the hotel room? So, they either have to be able to, open the card reader somehow, so the door needs to be automated. All of these different technologies will come into play if you want to have, an automatic door opening on every room door within your property. And then all of that taken together goes back to all of the questions that Stan raised when he was describing the economics of it. So now if you calculate it, you either send the housekeeper with each robot so that they will let them in, or you need to think through the system, how it will actually work and how much it will cost as well.
Absolutely. So there's definitely consideration of the robotic processes as well as the infrastructure of the building, the layout of the building, the coloring, the color schema, and everything else that goes into planning a building has to accommodate the robots. We do have a comment from John Thomas that says these robots may facilitate disabled guests and help with assistance for mobility, which could be accommodated with a smart building, but you first have to have the smart building in place. We also had one panelist ask a question related back to the demography, and she wrote, in regards to the expected drop in population in the next 10 years, while there will be less humans to provide the services and robots are a good idea to provide assistance, should we also be concerned with less travelers?
Possibly. That might be a concern, but we also have to look at some more global changes. When Stanislav was talking about population change, countries have solutions to this. I mean, one issue is to encourage people to have more children, which historically has not worked. There has been like a small bump, I think, in Australia and I think in Scandinavia. There was a short period in which it worked and it made a very modest positive impact. The other way is to import people, which is sometimes politically difficult, as we know. And the other choice is to robotize, which is a more or less immediate thing, and there's less sort of difficult political externalities as with immigration or mass immigration. So I mean, it's a political issue. Now, what that will also do is, if more developed economies stop allowing such large levels of immigration and they replace local labor with robotics, it does create an issue in which you'll have highly robotized economies, which are efficient older people and can become closed economies, more or less, at least and that pressure valve that less developed countries have had, where there's large population growth, won't exist anymore.
Okay.
And that's a major issue. The pressure valve that less developed countries have had, that is, there's countries in which labor is worth something and worth emigrating to, and which people are willing to pay for labor, that may be gone.
And we do see a lot of that in our industry specifically. We have seasonal workers who come up from islands and work on the coastlines during the optimal seasons. And that's how certain companies along the coast, on the East Coast anyway, are able to have a workable staff to facilitate their guests. So it's definitely an issue. We've spoken a lot about costs. We've spoken about infrastructure. We've spoken about demographics. We started with customer experience, and I'm wondering how the look of the robot might influence the customer experience. And I know, Craig, you're versed in the uncanny valley, and I'd love for you to explain to our participants what the uncanny valley is and how it impacts the future of service robots. What should robots look like, and what should we avoid, and is there a sweet spot?
Well, this is actually a very interesting concept. It was developed by Mori in 1970, I believe. So it's a fairly old concept. And the concept is that when robots don't look like humans, people don't mind working with them. There's a whole field called human-robot interactions, in which people study how humans interact with robots. And this comes from that field or subfield of study. That is, people don't mind working with robots. And then there becomes a point when they start resembling humans so much that people, and the language that's used many times is creepy. People find it creepy. They become uneasy working together with robots when they start resembling human beings too much. And that's why it's a valley. Everyone's okay with it, okay, and then it starts looking like a human. They're not okay with it. They're not okay with it. So that's the idea, is that it becomes a cliff of acceptance of robots. When they don't look like humans, no problem. When they start looking too much like humans, then people start feeling a little uneasy about it. And it does mean something for the technologists making these things, because if they want to make something that's very anthropomorphic, has that body of a human, it has to be really close to what a human looks like. Very, very, very close. Because anything that's just close but not really acceptable as a human, people will perceive as really creepy and be wary of working with.
It makes me think. Go ahead.
What I mean, it's a real challenge for the designers, because they have to be spot on, perfect, or they got to make it not look like a human.
It makes me think of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride with the Johnny Depp animatronics that Disney has created, because it looks exactly like him. But then if you look at his character and persona in the movies, he does have kind of jerky robotic moves. So then he almost took himself maybe back into the valley. I'm not sure.
Well, would you want to have a conversation with him or eat dinner with him?
The real Johnny Depp, or
the real one, probably. Yeah. But the mechanical one, it might be a little.
It would probably be very creepy. So is there an ideal look other than just not too much like a human? Have we come to a conclusion in terms of what they should look like or how they should be shaped? Should they be boxy? Should they be fluid? Should they be circular? Does it matter?
Well, it probably matters more when you're talking about the specific thing that the robot has to do. For a lot of things, I mean, you probably deal with a robot, but you don't think of it as a robot. When you go to an ATM, I argue that's a robot. That's it replaces the labor of a cashier at a bank. I mean, Stanislav, you might disagree with it as a robot or not. It's a machine. It's an automation, but it does something that humans used to do. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember a time when you actually had to go to a bank and deal with a person when you wanted money. Imagine that. But now you can go to this little machine and push a bunch of buttons, but it doesn't look like a human at all. So much that you don't probably even think of it as a robot. It's just a machine. That's probably the language you'd use to describe it. But when you start dealing with more interactive things that have a physical body, it can be a problem. It can be a real problem. And how people conceptualize it, you know, whether they put it in their mind as this is another human being that just happens to be mechanical, or if they concept, and that's why Stanislav and I are already looking at things to think about, is the literature on racism or and ethnicity relevant for studying robots? Because the question really becomes, you know, are you interacting with someone of a different ethnicity or race when you see that robot? And is that the way we're conceptualizing it, or and how do you overcome that sort of antipathy you might have toward treating the machine as if it's different?
It's a great question. And I think that kind of leads down the slippery slope of robotics rights and if they should have any rights and what those might look like.
Well, that's a big question ethically. I mean, when are robots humans? And when do they get human rights? At what point? At what level of development do they have to have before they deserve human rights?
Absolutely. We have quite a few panel questions, but I'd like to pause those because I think we're about to venture into quite an exciting topic, a little bit of a provocative topic. And that is the future of sex robots, speaking of robotic rights, and the role they'll play in the adoption of these technologies. Craig, would you want to maybe address that question?
I'll speak as the sexpert here. Yes, what it is one of the things that's really interesting, and they're doing a lot of research on now, is making sex robots. Now, it's a very revolutionary technology in a way, because although sort of bringing automation to sex, it's over 100 years old. There are some differences in how it is now. For example, the early sort of automation of sex was mostly gynocentric because it was associated with what was identified as a female sickness, so that's hysteria. So I mean, the language we use to describe the problem is very different from how you describe it and speak about it now. But the idea is that females had a problem with hysteria, it comes from the Greek word for the uterus. So they knew there was something associated with females and behavioral elements that could be fixed by inducing orgasm. And we have this from about 1900 or so. We have technologies that would do this. And many of you might have those technologies in your dresser drawers or whatever now, or the descendants of those technologies. The difference now is a lot of the research is looking at androcentric solutions to this problem too. So the interesting part about that is that it introduces social changes and social challenges that never really existed before. And it's actually a very interesting thing because when you look at the data on human sexuality and human desire for sex, you see males have much higher levels of desire for sex, and that continues. I mean, it peaks at an earlier part in their life, but it sort of goes down very slowly. Whereas females, it peaks fairly early on, and then it's a rapid demise in terms of desire. So there's a massive rift between males and females in terms of the demand. And what's interesting about this is the female demand, and those are just aggregate descriptors. I mean, there are individuals that will vary from what the mean descriptor of the population is. But it means that there's a massive rift between male and female desire, and the male desire had been almost completely overlooked by the technologies. You know, sort of the joking technologies, a blow-up doll, that it's not really for males, it's more of a joke. but the more recent technologies are looking at male stuff, and that creates a lot of gender issues. I mean, if you want to study gender, just look at female sort of resistance and feminist resistance to the development of this technology, because it really upsets gender relationships. If you perceive a gender relationship as some sort of frictions between male and female.
I wonder with COVID-19, what the hygiene factor that contributes to all of this discussion might look like in a hospitality setting if we're offering these technologies as well.
I think the technology, I mean, humans are Petri dishes. We're walking Petri dishes. That's why we have to go into quarantine.
Yes.
But once you clean off that thing, and there are technologies for this, nanotechnologies, there are all sorts of things. It's a far less risky thing than working with another human. And there are other elements of this too. If for example, sex doll technology becomes so advanced that I mean, the world's oldest profession could go almost completely extinct, because that can be completely robotized, and again, there becomes an issue is that, I mean, once you deprive those people that the only thing they have to sell is their sexuality, what happens to them? So we're walking into a sort of a political and social minefield, which with repercussions that can be very significant.
Might also lead to even further decline in population. But
oh yes, definitely. I mean, that's a risk. That is a risk. And again, the technologies are advancing on this, and they're becoming impressive. There wasn't it, Stanislav might remember, he has a better memory than I, about 4 years ago, there was a person that was going to set up a cafe in London that it's sort of, I think it was 2016 or so, it was going to go live. And it was a robot sex cafe, mostly for men, well, really just for men, I think. So it was going to be coffee, and it was a sex robot place. I don't think it ever happened, but there was a legitimate plan set up for that. That was kind of interesting because it was hospitality, because there was going to be coffee offered, but also sexual services by robots. And again, you have health and safety issues linked not just with the coffee, but I mean, Florida has a coffee issue with the spilling of the coffee in the McDonald's, but other like venereal diseases, STIs being transmitted possibly by not keeping the equipment properly clean. But again, that also, it's hospitality, and it's possible these days. But we don't know with further development of technology what that would look like in a hospitality setting. What we do know from the research is that hotel managers sort of speculate that people would want to bring their own sex robots to hotels rather than use the ones that they would like borrow or lease from downstairs. That's what we know so far. Although attitudes towards this might change in the near future.
Well, thank you for taking us on that adventurous foray into sex robots. I am going to bring it back from our racy topic. And because many of us on this chat are educators, what impact will robotics and automation have on education and the delivery and content of hospitality programs? We even had one of our respondents ask, what kind of career track would a hospitality student interested in robotic automation take? So, Katerina, would you like to field that?
Yes, sure. Well, I think that there will be a lot of changes due to the development and advancement of robotics and automation. So on both sides. So one side, I think, is the way how we teach, or the way how we deliver content to students, the way how we interact with students. The second aspect of it is that what do we teach in our hospitality programs content-wise, right? So if we think about the first part of it, how do we teach, then we already see examples around the world with professors trying to automate some of the tasks. So, and, you know, referring to all professors on this Zoom, on this webinar, we probably all had this feeling when we see the 95 times the same question, and the thought in our head, it's in the syllabus. Yeah. But we don't say that, right? So that's the nature of the job, that you take it one step at a time and you respond to this question. So, but then all of the automation technologies, they have already been used, for example, by building a chatbot that responds to the questions. So one of that is a possibility. So if you think about the future, can you have your teaching assistant become a chatbot? So maybe it's not a human anymore. Maybe that's an automated technology. Maybe it's a chatbot. So that's one of the possibilities. But then at the same time, if we keep going further and further, then we start raising questions about the role of the professor. So what do we do? And probably if we also combine that with the issue of the current pandemic that is going on and that is forcing many universities to think about the delivery and how they teach the courses. So we have seen many universities switch to the online format, right? Because we are vulnerable to this virus. So we need to think about the safe ways of teaching this. So then we find ourselves in a situation where we need to understand, okay, what does the professor do? What is the value? And now if you can have access to all courses from any university, right? So what's the difference for a student? How do they make a choice if they go to the University of Mississippi, to Ball State University, or to Warner University of Management? So if all courses are delivered online and we are teaching that in a virtual format, so then how do we make this unique? How do we offer the experience to students, and how the professor comes through that technology to actually, you know, engage with the students and share their experiences with them and so on. So, and I think that the second part of it is also to think about the content. So I think that it's very important for us to also educate students about what is happening in the industry. And even though we are not in the technology field, so we may not be teaching our students the skills of coding or building a chatbot or maybe designing a robot, but probably something which is very I don't know, interesting or demanded in this time is to have the collaboration between different disciplines, interdisciplinary collaboration. So we may be thinking about joint projects for students, or maybe interesting minors, or maybe something else that would allow students from different disciplines to cross-train and to understand the other areas. So for example, what can hospitality students do is that they understand the service culture, they understand hospitality, they understand serving the customer. So, and students who are, for example, studying programming, they may not be very skilled at that. So they may program, for example, the chatbot, but they may not be very knowledgeable about how the chatbot should address the customer, how they should behave. So I think that that offers a lot of opportunities for our students to be engaged, not in the programming capacity, but in the programming, in the capacity of providing content and showing maybe the expectations of the guest so that the robot can perform to meet the expectations of the customer and actually fit the environment of the hospitality business. So, and I think that on the larger scale, it's also probably wise for us to educate on a big scale what is going on and what artificial intelligence mean, what the robotics mean. So it's very interesting, I think, but the hospitality and tourism is one of those industries that actually brought robotics and automation to the everyday consumer, right? So in the past, you had to be, I don't know, space astronaut, or you had to be working in the medical field to have exposure to robots. So these days, you may be traveling and seeing a robotic bartender, or you may be traveling and seeing, for example, that butler robot at a hotel. So then I think that we probably also have, you know, an area where we could offer education, for example, as diversity courses at the university to teach about those technologies and educate everyone when they are traveling, what does this mean? What does artificial intelligence mean? What these technologies have as a benefit? What are the threats? So that we basically create educated consumers and educated travelers. But I think that definitely this type of information should be included and should influence the way how we teach and what we teach.
I concur entirely, and just from hearing what you're saying, I feel like we should have some sort of either class or track devoted specifically to employee and robotic interactions and how to cultivate that as part of an experience, either in an employee experience or HR class or a standalone class, or maybe a collaborative cross-university interdisciplinary class, who knows. But it seems to me, based on everything that's being said, that technology itself should be integrated and interweaved into all of the courses. And if there's a potential for it to collaborate with the technology or computer sciences or computer engineering departments within the universities themselves, to sort of create a more meaningful and pointed class that can deliver the services to both the guests and the employees and all of the vested interested parties. So with that, I am going to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists once again. Katerina, Stan, Craig, thank you so much for all of this insightful information. I also want to thank the Chaplin School and Dean Chang and Mike Hampton for putting all of this together and facilitating it for us. I'd like to thank the Greater Miami and the Beaches Hotel Association for co-hosting and facilitating this with us. And Wendy, I'm going to hand it back over to you for a final wrap up.
Thank you so much. I got to tell you, I never wrote down so much in my life. It was so fascinating. I grew up with the Jetsons, by the way. And it was just fascinating, and the attendees and the questions that were asked were really so impressive, and I just really can't thank you all enough for taking the time to be with us, and anything that we can do for you all. And when you come to Miami, please reach out to me so that we can get you a fabulous hotel stay. Okay. But thank you, Lisa, and thank you, FIU, and looking forward to the next one, which is next week. Oh, so should I announce next week's? Our technologies next week, we have, hang on one second. Oh, travel and tourism intermediaries and infrastructure on October the 2nd. So that will be our second one in a series of 5. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
And come
Thank you.
visit, don't forget.
Definitely.